Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs at LLG, who this week, despite predictions to the contrary, is flying solo on the podcast. So apologies to those who were looking forward to the soft lilt of Dennis Hall. You're stuck with me, I'm afraid. Whilst national politics continue to dominate the headlines and keep us pondering on what could possibly happen next, the announcement of the King's coronation date is causing concern for local government. The Association of Electoral Administrators has said it's in touch with the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities and the Electoral Commission over how the coronation of King Charles III will affect the timetable for elections in May. The association has said, "We know election teams with scheduled polls on the 4th of May will need to know how this may affect the election timetable. We do not know yet whether the May Day bank holiday will be moved to Friday the 5th of May, in the same way May Day 2020 was moved for the VE Day 75th anniversary." So this, of course, is raising eyebrows around the plan to count, which will need to take place post-elections. We await news of their discussions on this matter. Now, last week, LLG President and Vice President Helen Edwards and Rachel McCoy attended the Solace Summit. Principal news coverage of the event included commentary from Mark Lloyd, LGA's Chief Executive, on the recruitment difficulties currently facing local government. He cited a recent survey which found that 94% of councils were currently facing the challenge, with half rating them as moderate or a large concern. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the top three areas of concern were identified as planning, legal, and IT. LLG have long been aware of both a recruitment and retention issue within the local government legal sector. Indeed, this is why we have pioneered our graduate recruitment campaign and our Inspire programme, both of which are soon to be implemented and are focused at bringing both those at the start of their career, or indeed even before they have settled on a career, into local government, and also those who aspire to be the next leaders. The recruitment picture is complex. Authorities have long been concerned about the loss of staff into the private sector due to large gaps in wages. But Mark Lloyd was keen to stress that increasing rates of pay was, quote, not a silver bullet. Bradford City Council Chief Executive Kirsten England, who took part in a panel session at the summit, stated that it was pretty scary that 30% of the council's workforce was aged over 55, in one of the youngest cities in Europe demographically. Succession planning and resilience, it seems, most definitely needs to be on the top of the agenda. More will be forthcoming on LLG's initiatives in the early part of next year. In the meantime, planning for our third Work Experience Week is well underway, and if you want to get involved in hosting a student, then please do get in touch via our membership address. Now, in a wonderful piece of history making and an overdue first, Lubna Shuja has become the first elected Asian Law Society president and will take office as the Law Society's 178th first Asian, first Muslim, and 7th woman president. The Law Gazette reporting on the election points out that this is the first time where there will be two consecutive women presidents when I. Stephanie Boyce's term comes to an end. On learning her appointment, Lubna said, "The rule of law has been in the spotlight as never before in recent history. The UK's economy is on a knife edge, and businesses are having to deal with rising interest rates and high inflation. If the pandemic has proven one thing, however, it's that solicitors are resilient and adaptable. They keep the wheels of justice turning by providing services remotely, innovating at pace, and ensuring the public can get the justice they deserve. LLG congratulate Lubna and look forward to working with her during her term of other news. Following the government's formal lifting of the ban on drilling for shale gas in England and overlooking Jacob Rees-Mogg's reference to hysteria, fracking is back in the news following nearly 3 years of a moratorium. It has, as you can imagine, caused quite a stir amongst all political persuasions, and the question of how local consent will be assessed is high on the agenda. The LocalGov website reports that Lancashire County Council has called on the government to give local authorities the right to decide on whether fracking is allowed in their area. The County Council has written to the government calling for clarity on who makes the final decision when it comes to planning permission for fracking. County Councillor Adi Riggott, Cabinet Member for Economic Development and Growth, said, quote, "The new Prime Minister has lifted the moratorium but has given a clear commitment that fracking will only happen in areas where there is local community support. We welcome this, as it is right that local people should have the final say about whether fracking happens in their area or not. We now need clarity on what local consent means in practice, which is why we're writing to the government to ask them." Now, looking ahead to Parliament next week, what have we got in store? Well, there are questions on levelling up with the new Secretary of State, Simon Clarke. The SNP's David Linden is presenting a bill which would require the government to report on the impact of abolishing the benefit cap. There's a debate on the petition which attracted around 575,000 signatures on the call for an immediate general election, quote, "to end the chaos of the current government." The Lords Select Committee on the Children and Families Act will conclude its inquiry into how the law is working, and the Lords will examine the Health and Social Care Levy repeal bill. There's the remaining stages of the Public Order Bill, which brings in new measures to control demonstrations. I imagine that will be lively. There's a motion to implement the Standards Committee report into the MP's Code of Conduct and its appeal system, one to watch. The Lords will consider the Social Housing Regulation Bill, where the BBC reports that a vote is likely on a Labour amendment from Labour's Baroness Hayman, designed to ensure that senior managers who work for social landlords are properly trained and qualified following the Grenfell Tower tragedy. There's a lot more besides what I've listed here, and don't forget, you can watch all debates at Parliament Live TV. Turning to Wales, a Senedd report has identified that it needs to be easier for Welsh communities to manage their assets. Venues like community centres, libraries and pubs are vital for wellbeing and accessing services. But the Local Government and Housing Committee heard groups across Wales describe a number of obstacles, including the lack of statutory rights, accessing funding and getting the right support from local authorities. After public consultation and hearing evidence from key stakeholders, the report sets out 16 recommendations, starting with asking the Welsh Government to establish a commission to continue this work. That commission should then explore potential legislative changes, better access to funding, or affordable loans for community groups and support for those groups to compete against private investors when assets become available. And finally, if timekeeping isn't your thing, beware. The Employment Appeal Tribunal recently held that a dismissal for persistent lateness was fair, even though in a number of instances, the employee had only been a couple of minutes late. The full facts of the case are set out by Stuart McBride from TLT Solicitors in an article on the Local Government Lawyer website. But before you get concerned, there were specific elements to this case which sets it apart from the normal course of employment. And as Stuart himself concludes, in a world where flexible working is not only becoming the norm, but is being demanded by employees, employers requiring employees work to the minute where there is room for more flexibility are likely to be the subject of criticism. Finally, numbers for our LLG Governance Conference have hit pre-pandemic levels, and we are looking forward to welcoming members, speakers, and corporate partners to our event in Birmingham. For all those talented members out there, there might just be the opportunity to display your musical, poetic, or indeed thespian skills the night before the conference starts. But more on that to follow. So on that intriguing, or indeed alarming note, depending on your point of view, that's it for another edition of the podcast. Dennis Hall will be joining you next week, so thank you for listening and have a good week.